Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Ed O'Dowd. This is Capital Institutional Services monthly research briefing. This is part of a series where every month we're bringing you content from independent research providers, independent thought from our firm, and trying to help our clients make better investment decisions. So we welcome you back if you're a returning client or a friend of the firm that's been on before. You kind of know how we do this, and we usually just kind of intro it and kind of let them get going with it. But for those who are new, today we have markets policy partners. They basically are looking at the big picture, macroeconomic policy, what's going on in the political environment, and then how you can kind of take that information and glean it together and make better investment decisions. So we're excited about that. I think it's pretty timely today to have that type of a call. No question about it. Usually it's Brendan Walsh and John Fagan from Markets Policy Partners. Today, Brendan will be with us and he's going to be joined by Justin Kintz of Forbes Tate Partners, a political consultancy firm in Washington, D.C. Justin has a background in international relations, government affairs. So I think it's going to be great to have him on the call today too. So welcome, Brendan. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's always fun to do it once a quarter.
Awesome. Great to have you back. And Justin, we're excited to have you today too.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, no, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. We look forward to it. So we'll kind of get right into it. Justin, you and I were talking before the call about the tariff situation, and maybe we can start with your thoughts on kind of what's going on right now in the environment and how to interpret all this ever-changing environment. And how we can learn from
You got it, Ed. I kind of I remember in 08, 09 when Hank Paulson or Alan Greenspan would get up to give a talk about state of play and how they think things were settling down, and then something would happen dramatic in the markets, like as they were talking. That's been how it is for us on tariffs lately. I get up, I think I know what the state of play is. I get a few sentences deep, and then my phone lights up with like a new 25% on China or something like that, or the stock market starts diving on me when you think it's just stabilizing. So all this is caveated to say it will likely change by the time I'm done talking, because that's just how it is right now. But I'll try to give you the state of play, how we got here, why I think Brendan and Ed could probably layer in a little bit of the more macro monetary reasons why these things are happening. But I'll give you some of the political. And I think that this is a really good time to take a breath and analyze where we're at, because I do detect a serious pivot from the administration. It's starting to take more shape now than it has over the last 4 or 5 months. So where are we? The president, going back to his first term and also over the last few decades of his career, clearly loves the thought of tariffs, clearly has felt like we've been disadvantaged by China, primarily China. That has expanded geographically to include the rest of the world as well. And came into this term having tasted a little bit of success from his Section 301 tariffs on China in his first term, which were then extended and, in fact, enhanced by the Biden administration. So he came into this term enjoying the fact that he had raised, to his count, like $400 or $500 billion in revenue for the Treasury on those tariffs. He had created some geopolitical leverage against China, and he has been surrounded by some advisors who are real, true tariff ideologues, who think about it in a more sort of like dogmatic sense of, hey, what if we reshape the entire U.S. Federal Treasury around external revenue coming in rather than taxing our own citizens with income tax? How about we just tax all of our trade partners and make money that way? And we can balance the deficit, and we can make money, and we can exert geopolitical leverage all at once. Meanwhile, we can also cut taxes, which is his signature legislative attempt this year with the reconciliation package. So there's a lot of factors at play here. The president came out swinging, started with the Western Hemisphere, started with Colombia, Canada, Mexico, had some quick conflicts there trade-wise, mostly resolved them, pretended like it was about fentanyl and border. I guess it maybe was a little bit, but by and large, I think they were just flexing their muscles and stirring the pot a little bit and trying to get a couple quick deals done. Then they turned their scope more globally. And then a couple weeks ago on April 1st, rather, they announced Liberation Day, which was a series of reciprocal tariffs across the board, which then quickly spooked the markets, as you saw dramatically, and the president backed down a little bit and put in place a pause on that while maintaining a 10% global. However, he has since expanded considerably direct tariffs on China across a couple different fronts. He's expanded, sort of stacks different kinds of tariffs on top of each other. He's been using the novel IEEPA, the sort of an economic emergencies presidential authority, which has never really been used. It's been used in sort of like spot duty for, in terms of, enforcing against some rogue nations or terrorist states and things like that by like Nixon and Carter. But by and large, it's never really been used as a trade tool. So that's novel. It's now being challenged by the business community in court. It's being challenged by the state of California as of yesterday in court. And that's where you get your global reciprocal tariffs from, the 10% plus the previously proposed 49% of Taiwan or whatever. That is IEEPA. That's being challenged in court. It's very legally precarious. There's a good chance that in the next couple months is knocked out by a court order. Now, you also have the Section 301s, which was the first term, more sectoral, more product driven, more geopolitical against China to create leverage against them. You also have the Section 232s, which is your national security bucket. So that includes like steel and aluminum and their derivatives. That will include or is in the process of being included for pharmaceuticals, for energy, for agriculture, what am I missing? Electronics and semiconductors. So if you think about what are the things that are really, really critical to our national security, let's say if China chose to shut them off overnight, we'd be in deep trouble. Those kinds of things are going into Section 232 of Trade Code. So what looks like everything sort of all at once a month ago, now there's a little more clarity, which is that this, we are more training our sights on China from a trade war perspective and making it much more about them. One big deviation vis-a-vis China from the first term is that the Southeast Asia nations like Vietnam, Thailand, India to some degree, and then also Mexico as being places that companies could pivot their supply bases from mainland China to those places to try to get away from the Section 301 tariffs. The administration has clocked the fact that China clocked that and has started to push factories into northern Mexico to route in through the U.S., through North America. The administration's figured that out. They're trying to close that off. And that's why you see a lot of the pressure on some of our traditional trade allies, places like Vietnam, that you wouldn't expect normally. And those countries, by the way, along with Japan, Korea, and the UK, are desperately trying to cut quick trade deals bilaterally so that they can lower their own tariffs and open things back up again. But that is a part of the focus for the president too, is how do we figure out a way to really, really pressure China, really pressure the companies that are operating their supply chain and factories there. How do we get them back into the U.S. And re-onshore that? I don't think the president actually wants to hurt the stock market. I think he sees that as a really important metric for him. I also think that there are some mostly pragmatists between him and his cabinet secretaries and his advisors in terms of knowing that like you're probably not going to get a lot of American workers to paint smiley faces on Barbie dolls and like screw in the cases on the iPhones and things like that. So I do think they are saying that they want to onshore all that manufacturing again, and but I think they also appreciate that is probably a bygone era and that they're more focused on high tech trade, but they do want to maintain the leverage. They do enjoy using this as a club to hit trade partners over the head with, and they do enjoy isolating China. There may be some broader like monetary policy trickery at play where they're trying to intentionally bring down the economy so that the Fed can cut rates or so that they can refinance our debt, which is coming up here soon. I'll leave more of that to Brendan. But by and large, we are starting to see this now settle into more known knowns. Known known is this. Section 232s are going to be stickier because they're about national security, and it's harder to exempt people from that. It's harder to take them on and off. There's going to be an actual process there that'll be sort of more formal, procedural, and transparent. So that's going to be run through USTR. It's going to run for up to 270 days. I think the president will push and probably be more like 6 to 9 months. They'll be doing investigations formally where the business community and affected stakeholders will be able to actually weigh in, lobby it a little bit, submit public comment, and try to influence the outcome of those. There may even be an exclusions process on the backside, much like what we saw during the first term. They've been reluctant to issue any exclusions this time. I heard that Bob Bleitheiser hated the exclusion process at USTR during the first term, and he's been advising the administration not to open that up again because it completely overwhelmed USTR's resources, and so they weren't able to actually negotiate trade deals. They were too busy managing the exclusions portal. That may go live at commerce. It may be limited. It may not exist at all. But if it does reemerge, I would expect it won't be as widely used as it was in the first term. But the 232s are going to be more like that. So if you're investing or you know, trying to analyze companies that are heavily exposed on electronics, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, energy, agribusiness, you're thinking more about these 232s. I would think about them as being probably more sustaining through the next 3-4 years or beyond. I would think about those as being really like tied to China specifically. And I think I would think about those as being ones that could be lobbied on. I mean, you saw automobiles, another good example. Automobiles, energy, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, were originally sort of exempted from the 25% Canada and Mexico tariffs that were applied for like 36 hours. There's a reason for that, and it's because they were more critical. Their collective lobbies had been working the president on this for years, and certainly in the last few months, and their executives had been in Mar-a-Lago all winter preparing for that conversation, and the White House knew that those were just too critical to touch. Speaking of critical things, critical minerals are also now being included, as well as their derivatives. That should be pretty widespread. That's going to also be 232. So if I'm you all, and I'm looking at like tech plays or auto plays or pharmaceutical plays, I'm going to be focused much more on how those 232 investigations go. I'm going to really zoom in on that process.
Yeah, and I think especially on the critical minerals, well, we, you know, are setting up a potential for, you know, exemptions, like Justin said. China has cut us off from a number of those. I'm slightly conflicted on what I can share, but I would really encourage everybody to look at the specifically 7 minerals that are being cut off from not just the United States, but the world, and figure out what those things go into and what companies are dependent upon them.
You said 7? There's 7?
There's 7 rare earths.
Okay, got it.
I'll conclude after this part, which is that, so I've explained why 232 I think is the most important thing now. The IEEPA ones, these are the reciprocals that are being negotiated. They're on pause. There's that baseline 10%. It's legally precarious. I think it'll probably be knocked out by a lawsuit, but consider it this: the reciprocals are like the president's opportunity to exact geopolitical leverage to get concessions on policy items, whatever they may be. You know, with the EU, it's probably more related to like Ukraine, NATO, making sure that they rearm themselves and take some of the defense spending off of us. With Thailand, Vietnam, India, et cetera, it's like getting them to just lower their tariffs down to 0 and, you know, claim press release wins. Japan and Korea, it's to allow for maybe more market access for us on automobiles, on tech. They've been like famously tough to do business there in those areas. So I think he's going to try to use it in the meantime like that very quickly, try to get quick trade deal wins. I would expect Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Taiwan, maybe, well, let me reserve Taiwan, but Korea, Japan, UK, and India will probably be the first of that bunch to get quick win trade deals, and you'll see their tariffs come down. You'll see some non-tariff trade barriers lowered. I think then Trump will claim that as a huge win for the reciprocals. And then if it gets knocked out by court order or whatever, fine. But I think that's where he's just trying to.
And that's going to take, that would probably end up at the Supreme Court. So it's going to be a while before that gets there, right?
Yeah, for sure. So for like when you're puzzled, scratching your head, why is Canada included? Why is Switzerland included? The Philippines, whatever, like that's what this is about, I believe.
Yeah.
And so I think you'll see deals on those, and he'll tout that as a win. And they may well be wins for U.S. businesses, multinationals looking to do business abroad with non-tariff trade barriers. Okay.
I think I think the other point that you made in terms of the revenue that tariffs, raise is important for, the other big policy, which is the tax cut. So recently we began the reconciliation process in the Senate, in the House. And they kind of simply what they voted on is we just assume the tax cuts don't roll off. If they rolled off, it would bring in about $3.5 trillion in revenue. So because of the process, the House voted we don't have to pay for that $3.5 trillion. So what they need to do now to deliver on all the things that Trump promised is find another 1.5 trillion. And while I do think that the bill will pass eventually, it's not going to be super easy because of how tight both the House and the Senate is. And with that 1.5 trillion, you're going to have to cut some things that are popular. What do you guys think on Forbes State's end?
Yeah, I think that's right, Brennan. I think that a bill will get done. I think they're debating it furiously right now behind closed doors. There'll be markups in May. I think a bill will happen probably in the fall. It kind of has to happen. And I think they will get what they need at least in terms of TCJA extension, the tax cut extension from 2017.
Right.
I think they will get funding for the president's priorities on immigration, border, on defense. As it relates to like deeper tax cut, and by the way, some probably superficial cuts to federal government spending, for all the fuss around DOGE and all the fuss around cuts to federal spending, because they're unwilling to touch Medicaid or Medicare or Social Security, it's just not going to look that impressive. Like
the rounding errors, I agree.
Yeah. So, to get the tax cuts they need, they're going to do as much sort of funny math as possible in Congress to score it differently. They will try to claim tariff external revenue wins as a rhetorical device. They can't actually use that to calculate. And then finally, I think they'll try to, you might actually see tax increases on top tier. You might see a broadening of the base on corporate tax rates, even if they remain the same or if they go down. I think you'll just see a broadening of the base generally. So I don't think you're going to see significant tax cuts for those kinds of stakeholders, but I do think they'll at least try to keep what's there.
100% agree.
Can I just ask one question? With the Section 232 national security, who is that in place for right now? You said Canada. I think you mentioned
it's global now.
Does it include China though?
Yeah.
Okay. Wasn't sure if that was fully enacted.
And interestingly though, if you have it has an exemption essentially. So like if that good is under 232, you're not getting the additional IEEPA ones applied to it. It's exempted from IEEPA.
Okay. Got it.
Which for clever companies, when we had the reciprocals, I'm aware of some companies who were like suddenly their chief trade partner was like, let's say it was Taiwan, and I think Taiwan was 49% or 47 or something, but the steel and aluminum tariffs were 25%. So they're like, well, let's just like include steel and aluminum as part of that good now, and let's save the 24%. So, and there is some wiggle room for companies to operate differently to take advantage of these now that they're stacking and there's exemptions emerging and certain, different strategies can be used rather than pulling up stakes from one country and trying to onshore another country and spin up manufacturing, which takes a ton of investment and time. Some companies are just getting clever about how to negotiate these tariffs.
Okay. All right, good deal. All right, Brendan, any thoughts on that, or I don't know if we wanted to.
No, totally.
Tariffs or
100% agree. I guess we can certainly talk about the Fed and the ECB, but we heard from Powell yesterday, and everything that Justin just said is going to affect the U.S. economy and the global economy one way or the other. And so I think you have a Fed that's kind of on hold, much to the annoyance of the president. But I do think his job is safe for the time being. And really, what the Fed does is, quite honestly, what you think is going to happen to the economy. If we go in recession, they'll have to cut. If we kind of stay in this uncertain, I think they stay on hold. if the economy holds in and tariffs prove to be inflationary, you actually could maybe see a rate hike or two, in the second half of the year. But, each one of your opinion on the economy is as good as mine, and the Fed will act accordingly. There's definitely not normal times to be a Fed watcher.
Definitely not. And I think it seems like the Fed wants to hold on to rates where they're at. So afraid of inflation kind of coming back seems to be the number one thing that guides Powell's. They as a unified group feel like inflation is the number one issue. We kind of got it under control. We hope and we think, and for that to come back would be horrific. So I think they
and
hang
then it
on
would
to
take
that race.
Fed credibility into question, which is, especially right now with everything going on, I think they want to see the whites of the eyes before they, get too stimulative. But they will provide, liquidity to the markets if and when it's needed. So, we're not going back to QE or anything like that, but all the other special things that the Fed is capable of doing, to make sure the treasury market and the funding markets operate properly, they will certainly do those if needed. But, knock on wood, we had a hiccup, 2 weeks ago, but in the end, the capital markets behaved properly, and nothing broke.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do you have any thoughts on recession in terms of, we're starting to see investment banks ascribing a certain percentage chance of recession later in the year, or even if we trickled into early 26? Do you have any thoughts on? I know it's a best
No,
guess.
it's a good question, and I totally agree with Justin that every country that is not China is going to try to cut a deal, and I think that can happen quick enough that it doesn't, bring the global economy into recession. But China's a different story, and we're going hard after them, and they're coming hard back at us. So I think you really want to pay close attention to the reciprocal things that China could do to us and is doing to us. That's going to be the wild card for the global economy here in 2025.
Absolutely. Well, the withholding of these 7 rare earth minerals is a big deal, I believe.
Yeah, so China dominates 90% of the rare earth market. Back in the 80s, China doesn't have oil, and they identified these as something that they have. So, it is something that we don't have. We have a small amount, but we, not just the United States, but the world is dependent upon China for their rare earth supplies, but also other critical minerals, that play a large role in the economy. So that's what I would focus on in terms of negotiations between the United States and China, them holding back the things that we need and us holding, back the things they need.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think I'd read that or heard that literally about 130 countries have been in some level of communication with the White House to try to play ball in terms of like getting a trade agreement. If China becomes this one big isolated, we're gonna play hardball right back with the U.S. We're not gonna let you bully us on this. I'm hoping this, or I have any thoughts on how this plays out with China? Either of you, Justin? Brendan,
I mean,
thoughts?
the form of these deals, I think, could take the form of like 4 or 5 things. One of them, or all 5 of them, which is, first of all, let's say it's Vietnam or like Switzerland or something. Okay, you're going to accept some tariffs on your exports to the U.S. without retaliation, or you're going to lower yours to 0, and you may still get our 10%. You're going to stop your unfair trade practices and open your markets to our imports and to our businesses. No more digital service taxes, no more block on U.S. banks, no more block on U.S. auto, those kinds of things. No more currency manipulation, blah, blah, blah. It pledges to boost their defense spending, pledges to boost procurement from American companies, pledges to stand up factories in the U.S. So like take pharmaceuticals, for instance, if you're a European pharmaceutical maker, we want to see you producing those in the U.S., and we don't want to see anyone in Ireland, and that, all the U.S. ones in Ireland, pull those back, that kind of stuff. And then finally, ultimately writing checks to the Treasury, to Brendan's point about, tallying it up for tariff revenue for the sake of demonstrating that we can balance the deficit. So I think those are like the big key components that the president wants to see, and he wants wins that are visible that he could show to his American people to be popular. So, I would expect some splashy things, even if like, I don't think our trade imbalance with Vietnam is that big of a deal. I don't think anyone's stressing about chicken thigh imbalances, but
Right.
I do think like using them to agree to helping to box out China, both from a national security perspective, but from an economic perspective too. And like the same idea, I think that the White House had on let's consolidate our sphere of influence in North America so that we can create like a single phalanx against the Chinese from a trade
100% agree.
Canada, Mexico. Let's project that to Southeast Asia as well and block them out, and North Asia with Japan and Korea. Let's block them out from China. And then once we have the whole world sort of concentrated from a trade perspective, then we could really leverage China even harder up to the point of breaking, because I think they think we can win a war of economic attrition with the way that the Chinese economy and their political, how sort of thin Xi Jinping's political power is at the moment.
Right. So if we get everybody else in the world in line and kind of have an agreement with them, then it turns the whole world to turn at once and look at China like, okay, you're the last one. We can kind of exist as a world without you if we get manufacturing in other countries or in the US, with the exception of potentially the rare earth minerals. But if other countries were to slow exports of oil to China, I don't know that Russia would ever do that. I would ever slow it. But could that be a factor? I'm not sure. Who are they majorly importing from? The Middle East and Russia on the oil side?
You actually just got to see this play out with Venezuela. So
right,
like we're going to impose for anyone who imports Venezuelan oil, we'll impose an extra 25% tariff on top of your head. China's the chief importer of Venezuelan oil, so that closed that off pretty quickly. I think mostly like Asian markets are a lot of pressures coming off with oil being as cheap as it is. So that helps them out a lot, and probably helps them. It gives them some latitude as it relates to striking trade deals with the U.S. With that pressure off, and them being more aggressive against China on our behalf.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's the game plan. And then the question will be, how long does it take, and how long can the economy, hold up? And those are answers today. I don't know, and I'm not sure that anyone knows.
Well, that's a good question, and that's a question. Speaking of questions, we usually take questions at the end from our audience, and I encourage anybody that has a question to put it into the chat, and I will read it off to Brendan and Justin. But I'll start with a question of my own: is how long? Once we started hearing about the tariffs and the markets reacted, that's been all we've talked about. How long do you think these 130 or so countries, we get a deal done pretty quick? How long are we talking about tariffs? How long is this in limbo? Is it the next 6 months, 3 months, 9 months, a year? Like any type of best guess on how long this, till we kind of turn the page and we have these trade agreements in place and we can kind of move on to the next thing? Not that it's been around, not that this has been a topic of discussion more than like, what's it been, 6 weeks, but how long does this go on for?
I would offer that as long as Trump is president, you're going to see volatility here, like the old world order and of like, working through institutions very gradually and striking free trade agreements and putting together multilateral trade deals. I think those days are over for now, as long as Trump is president. I think he probably thoroughly enjoys being able to create some chaos and throw trade partners onto their back foot and to the US's advantage, because it's a little bit of asymmetrical economic warfare in that way. Yeah, even for allies. And who are our allies anymore? It's like, I think Canada was shocked, and the European Union's been shocked that we've been threatening tariffs on them. But when you look at like what the president and JD Vance's perspective is on them right now, it's like, I think we're probably closer to like Argentina and Italy than we are to traditional allies like the UK and Europe, at least politically. So I think he's going to continue to wield that weapon as needed to exact geopolitical leverage on other policy items, whatever that item might be. Like, let's say the UK bans X. okay, Elon,
Yeah.
don't worry, I got your back. Like I'm going to go threaten a new tariff on them, and then they'll break, and then they'll remove that barrier on X. I think you could see that kind of thing play out over the next several years. And I think there'll be a desensitization to it for financial markets. I think it's already begun. Like I think they saw that, at least for reciprocals, the emperor has no clothes really on that, and that it's like it's flimsy and that it's not serious really. But I do think the market does have to like accept that we're not going back to the old ways pre-2016 of like, yeah, if there's a trade dispute, it'll get settled out gradually through the WTO. We might yet withdraw from the WTO. A lot of the existing trade institutions that we relied upon are gone. USMCA may dissolve into 2 separate bilateral trade deals for US Canada and US Mexico, because those 2 things just don't make as much sense anymore. So I wouldn't expect to see those. But what's funny is that we may yet end up with sort of bilateral trade deals with each Southeast Asian nation that mimic what would have been true
What
with
we had.
TPP. Yeah, like if
Yeah,
they had
exactly.
just kept TPP, we would have ended up with almost the exact same place like 8 years ago. So
Yeah.
so it'll be different, but it won't be so. It'll look different. The style will be different. It'll be much more erratic, but I don't think ultimately we end up in a much different place necessarily with other countries. China is the one where, you might see, like Brendan said, a more true trade war.
Yeah, I totally agree. If tariffs were a core pillar of his candidacy, and I think a lot of people on Wall Street thought it was art of the deal. But no, this is a different way of looking at the world and the economy. And tariffs will be a part of our policy going, for the next 4 years. It's just a question of how big and how erratic.
Right. That makes sense. I appreciate the synthesizing all this information for us and giving us a lot to digest and think about on our own.
Yeah, call us next week.
Well, that's just it. And I think all this happened since the last time we had you on. I mean,
Exactly.
which has been 3 months, and a lot has happened in 3 months. So wish we had you on again sooner, because it's really, it will be fascinating to me. I'll remember this conversation, how much things could evolve or change between now and next time we have you on. So
Exactly.
well, Justin, it was great to have you on today. We appreciate your thoughts.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Justin.
Brendan, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Everybody, thank you for joining us on the call today. Appreciate your taking your time before a holiday weekend. Our next call is going to be Katie Stockton of Fair Lead Strategies. She focuses on technical analysis. We've had her on many times in the past for those of you who have joined us for her call, and that's going to be Thursday, May 22nd. So we'll be reaching out to you on invites for that. All right, everybody, have a great day. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much.